I see Bill's got his hand up. We don't usually let him talk, but we'll make an exception.
All right, well,
We're
if we
gonna
don't like
let
his
Bill
question, we'll
talk?
just ignore him.
Not Bill.
So here's my question. And I might have missed them as we got through those last slides, but did we have any slides on consumer sentiment? I noticed that just the other day, the White House was cheering on a conference board report that said that consumer confidence had risen to the highest level since 2020. It rose to 114.8. And that was, I think, the third article that I'd seen in the last month and a half that was showing consumer confidence growing, which I'm guessing is a positive lagging indicator of the good news on the front side of the economy. But I don't know. Do you have an opinion on that, Karl and David?
Karl, do you want to start?
Well, a lot of economists look at consumer sentiment as a leading indicator of what the economy is going to do. Because since consumer spending is a big part of our GDP, consumer sentiment tends to say people are going to go out and spend some money. I don't remember who I was talking to in the last 24 hours. Oh, my brother. He and his wife were going out to buy a new car today. But people are doing that.
And I think you're right, Bill, in that I'm going to put the University of Michigan sentiment thread chart into the chat here in a second, but it's definitely gotten better. It's still pretty low historically. It's below the pre-pandemic numbers, the sentiment. I think you know that Karl and I have been saying things are pretty good for a long time. Like 2022 and 2023 both look very good relative to 2019. It isn't that numbers suddenly got good. But we're in around October when the GDP report came out with that 4.9% growth, and the stock market reacted. I think it was after that. I don't think it was the stock market was already going up. The stock market really took that well, and the stock market started going up. It seemed like those two numbers together sort of broke the dam, if you will. You know, if the dam was holding back all the good news, the media holding back all the good news and saying, you know, but inflation, kind of like but her emails, but inflation, you know, that seemed to change the narrative, switched very suddenly based on those two things. And I'm not aware of any other event that occurred right then that suddenly made everybody happy, but it seemed the media narrative changed pretty quickly when those two things started going the right way. And it's a mystery to me. What do they call it? Animal spirits or ghosts? Some people, what causes people to suddenly? But maybe they just got tired of the old narrative and they were ready for a new one. But those two pieces of news were like overwhelmingly positive, and the media covered it that way, and it switched this around, and we've been going up since then. But we hit, according to the Michigan Sentiment Survey, we hit bottom in June, or the recent bottom in June. And so that October was a little bit later than that, obviously. Things had started to turn upward a little bit, but that seemed to be where it picked up steam, at least on my radar. So, but sentiment is still bad. People still hate this economy. When I was looking at some numbers, there were some polls that came out that say people really don't like these numbers at all, and they have and it's interesting that they hate the economy. They also don't have the correct information. Like they're saying jobs are not going up, or unemployment is not getting better, or things are worse than they were in 2019. Inflation seems to be completely absorbing their minds, and not the fact that wages have actually outdone inflation on average. The average person, I say average person, is much better off. I mean, Karl and I have said it before, some people are suffering, no doubt about it. But if you kept up with the average, you're way better off now than you were, before the pandemic. And, if you didn't get a 20% raise and inflation's 20%, yeah, you're hurting. If you got the 20% raise and you face the 20% inflation, you're doing fine. So it just depends, but the media has been relentless with the negativity, and that's starting to shift a little bit. Also, somebody who helps us out when they do this is the Federal Reserve consistently says the economy is good. And the media covers that and they hear him, what he's saying. And he's a big help too. I mean, when you read the Fed speeches or the big news conference, it's one piece of good news after another. And the inflation coming down, of course, is another part of this. It's been steadily coming down, but it seems like that's breaking the dam a little bit too. So we'll take it. It's better than it was.
Yeah, thank you. The stock market going up for the last 2 months every night seems to be a new record, which is excellent.
Yep.
And I know that Social Security. My wife and I were looking at our Social Security over the last couple of years, last 3 years, and that's almost 20%, a little over 20% compounded increase, which is, that's above the inflation. So.
Well, let me tell you an interesting piece of math that is not ever covered in the news, and it's important, but people don't think about it this way. If, let's say, you have wages and inflation going up the same amount, we showed you that slide that shows the wages are up a little bit more. Real wages are up 3% or so from 2019. But think about this: wages are applied to your gross income. Right? That's your hourly rate on average, whether you're a salary person or an hourly worker getting punching a time card. Those numbers are in there. They're all factored in there. But the inflation is only applied to your costs. So if you make, I'm going to use a round number because it's easier, but if you're making $100,000 and your costs, and after taxes you got 70. And your costs are 60, so you're saving 10. So 100, 70, and 60, right? The inflation is applied to that 60, and the wages are applied to that 100. So that's a big difference. You're way better off if wages and inflation go up the same amount just from the math. And now if you're a person whose expenses are higher than your income, then that's different. But the vast majority of people, you have a gross income, you have taxes that are taken out of that. You have, an after-tax income, and some subset of that you're spending, and some subset of that you're saving. And the inflation is applied to that amount that you spend. It doesn't apply to what you save. It doesn't apply. It's the wage increase that applies to your gross income. So people don't talk about that, but it's big. It's a significant improvement in your circumstances if wages are going up as much as your inflation that you experience.
One other thing, I've been getting requests from our group. They said, can you give us slides or tweets or threads that have 3 key economic facts on them? So I really like that one that you had there that had 3 in it, because they don't want to overwhelm things and they get confused when they get a lot of data. So yeah. I know I follow you and I try to retweet what you do, re-X what you do, and put it on threads. If you could hit on the big 3 or change those every couple of days so that we can get it out to our members to be talking about, because we've got to get the word out that it's not doom and gloom. There's sunshine over there in the West coming this way.
Oh yeah. I mean, and as much as the media picks on it, it seems that this inflation coming down has been a tremendous help. But Americans became the richest ever in 2022, and we're not far from that. That's what that slide I showed you that I stole from the AFL-CIO, that format. I think they did a really nice job with it, and I may have to change it to be like some other shades or something, but blue is nice for the Democrat. Yeah, I mean, it certainly can put other facts in there. I really like those 3 or that grouping, and I'll work on some others, but I encourage you guys to share the heck out of that slide. It's really easy to do that. And those numbers are all good, and they should be fairly stable. One of the reasons why these presentations are challenging is because these numbers move, not only because you get a new month of data in there, but also if you're doing the adjustment for inflation, that changes every month. So if you're trying to state things in current dollars, you have to restate all the history. And so it makes it a little more complicated to do all that, but it's a labor of love. We get it right. We get it 98% right, and we usually spot our errors pretty quickly. So I can get those for you, Bill. No problem.
Yeah, just put them up in your Twitter feed or your Threads feed, and I'll pick them up and we'll like them, and then we'll share them. Excellent.
I just put that University of Michigan slide out there, so you can click on those, download them, and you'll have you've got all that information. I still haven't gone through that Congressional Budget Office report from yesterday. We'll do that next month. We moved this one up to the beginning of the month mainly because I think, Karl, you're out for the back half or a big chunk of February. So we got this out of the way now. So
I'm escaping the cold north on Monday, actually, and heading to Florida.
excellent.
And I'll be gone for quite a while. I'll actually be doing March's meeting on the road, but I'll be back up in the Chicago area for April's meeting. So if I had anything to rob at my house, feel free. But
you hear that, Ori? You live not too far from Karl, so
my TV still has a wooden cabinet. So
and just a note to you guys, we have not only we heard from the gentleman from Ohio, but we've got a person on from California today. Nelson Tam is on, so
Wonderful.
We're getting a really nice spread out there.
Good.
So welcome, everybody. Glad you could join us.
Yeah.
And we'll probably keep going with discussions as people care to. That tends to be our standard.
If you guys have other questions between Karl and I, we could probably answer it or get you the information one way or the other. That's what we do for fun.
Yeah. So in chat, there, Carrie had noted earlier that credit card purchases were at an all-time high balances, and I can't remember who. I think who was it? Somebody said left a note about why weren't gas prices going down, because the price of crude had been going down, and you may want to. I think that was Linda Stelter that had said that, but you may want to address some of those comments in chat.
Let me start with the credit card one. And this is a general comment on whenever you hear people talking about the debt level, like they're complaining about credit cards hitting $X or the national debt hitting 34 trillion or whatever, usually they don't know what they're talking about, because they're just trying to shock you with some number, and they don't think about it. Of really what matters isn't the number, because the number is always going to be going up. Like for debt, the national debt, for example, it matters what it is as a percent of the GDP. It isn't that it's a giant number, it's how big is it relative to the size of the economy. And in fact, under Biden, the most important measure of the debt held by the public, which is the marketable securities that investors own, that ratio has fallen from the peak under Trump and started to tail up a little bit lately, but it's been falling. So that is a good thing. Now, I'm looking at the credit card delinquencies here on Fred, and I'll put it in the chat. Credit card delinquencies are still below 2019, but they've been increasing lately. More important than the amount of the credit card debt is the delinquency rate. If people have a lot of debt, who cares if they're able to cover it? If they're not able to cover it and they are seeing delinquencies, then you've got a problem. And it looks like recently those delinquencies are starting to tick up. And so we do have to watch it, but understand they're still very low. So don't get too nervous about credit card debt yet and delinquencies, but do keep us honest and ask for that information, and we can share it, because we shared it several months ago, and we said, we'll be watching this, and it's coming up a little bit, but it's still low. And let me cut and paste that guy in there. Mark is our usual oil guru, so let's let Mark answer, I suspect, that question about the gas and the oil price disconnect.
I don't have that.
Okay.
I could probably get it, but I actually, because that's probably right on Yahoo Finance. But the one thing I do have, this I guess was an econ day for me. This morning, Harper College had an analyst from RSM Securities give us an hour on his view of the economy, and it was very bullish, talking about not anticipating a recession. He said the probability was 15%, and he said that's their default nothing happening probability. They never go below that because something could happen always, and the numbers are very good. But this afternoon, I tuned into a webcast, and it was run by Laurentian University out of, I believe that's Montreal, and one of their econ profs. And his guests were Claudia Sahm and Joseph Stiglitz.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
That's a good crew right there. Yep.
I'll be honest with you, man. It was right on the edge over my head. But one of the things Stiglitz said was when you look at the debt, he said people compare it to the GDP, but if you actually there's bigger numbers. I believe that there's bigger numbers than that, the total economy, and it was like 144 billion or something like that. And
that's
so
the net worth. That's the net worth of U.S. households is about that number.
okay, so net worth
Trillion, not billion.
If the net worth is 144 billion and the debt's only 34, Stiglitz'
Right.
comments was, "What's the problem?"
Right. Good. Yeah, that's great.
And I don't, even if I knew he was absolutely wrong and he was saying white was black, I wouldn't argue with the guy. So, yes, Seth, I see your point, but the guy is an analyst and he has been bearish in the past. I will say that the same outfit, I believe it was this guy's boss, was there 18 months ago. Because this is a deputy chief or something. And I believe the chief was there out of New York. They're both out of New York. I think 18 months ago, this guy was there one more time that I have seen him. And they are not always, they're by no means always bullish. So I see your point, but that hasn't been my experience.
I saw the 2024 forecast from Goldman Sachs, and they've been pretty consistently bullish on this. They've been a group that's been closer to the actual what's happened, because most economists had a pretty dour outlook for 2023, expecting recession.
And they ate a lot of crow too.
Sorry, what was that?
They had to eat some crow too.
Oh, I'm sure. But here's an interesting thing they said is that they don't expect the interest rates to go down until the fourth quarter of 2024. You've been hearing a lot of news around when's the Fed going to cut the interest rates. There are different ways that they measure the odds of these things, and a lot of the odds were pointing toward the second quarter. And the Fed chair kind of dismissed that in the last meeting, said, I'm data driven. I'll look at the data and see what happens, but don't assume that we're going to cut rates in the second quarter. And there's Goldman Sachs in November of last year saying we don't expect the interest rates to get cut until the fourth quarter of 2024. So there are a variety of views that are out there, but the economy being this strong would indicate that interest rates would stay higher for longer. The big trigger, I think, of a change in that policy would be if we missed a couple months we had negative job creation for a couple months. Then I think you'd see the alarms start to go off. But with job creation like this, 500,000 jobs with adjustments last month, that's huge. I mean, that's like twice what they normally are. So, I mean, that's a very bullish indicator.
Yeah. So I just for reference, I just had an agency bond, which was at effective rate of 5.36%. They called it. I had to replace it. And actually I found something close to that, but that was longer term. But they were talking in this Stiglitz meeting about interest rates staying up for an extended period of time, and also in the same meeting this morning. But, don't get your hopes up. But it isn't cutting into the job growth, so I guess that's part of it. The other thing I will say, I think we've talked about here, and I've actually had a positive response and a comment about this from Claudia Sam. They were talking about, in fact, it was this professor out of Laurentian University stating outright, we need to find another way to control inflation other than by causing unemployment. And because that's all the default method, raise interest rates. It doesn't hurt the really rich, but it a lot of people to lose their houses, and we need to find another way.
And there's two ways to control inflation. You either produce what people need to buy so the prices go down, or you get rid of the money so people can't spend money.
Well, we did it this last time by actually putting money in the hands of the people and raising interest rates. So that doesn't completely jibe.
There's a chart I'm working on I'm presenting at a conference in my industry on economics in a month or two, and one of the slides in there it shows how the money supply grew right after this pandemic hit relative to the GDP. There's a famous quote by Milton Friedman, and I'm going to mess it up. Some of you guys here may know it, but essentially it says inflation is a monetary phenomenon, it's created and ended by the central bank. It's their job to, basically their job to control it. And he also studied the Great Depression and said that one of the main reasons for the Great Depression was a 33% reduction in the money supply. So what you see in the money supply here, I'm going to just describe what this chart looks like. I'll see if I can dig it out here. The money supply grew very, very fast, right, as this pandemic hit, as you would expect. And we didn't get inflation for a while. And then as the money supply peaked and started to come down, right at that peak is when inflation really took off. And then for the first time, for data going back all the way to 1960, the money supply actually has fallen since then. And for the first time since 1960, it's lower versus a year earlier.
You're talking the M2, right?
Yes, the M2 money supply, it fluctuates up and down, so there have been periods of time when it's a little lower than the prior month. But generally throughout our history, the money supply has always gone up at various rates. And this is the first time that it's ever been reduced year over year, meaning the balance now is lower than a year ago. And it's been like that for, I think all of 2023, the money supply was lower. Each month was lower than the year before. And that's never happened. So the Fed is taking getting that money supply out very seriously.
So COVID absolutely shows that Friedman quote to be a lie, because
Go ahead.
Money can be exchanged for goods and services. What happened in COVID was you had a hard crash in the real economy. People were not making the same goods and services that they were a year ago. And you did not have an increase in the money supply in the way that Friedman suggests, but you absolutely had a crash in output, so people had to pay more to get the same stuff.
You're arguing a supply side shock, not a demand side.
Exactly.
Yep.
MV equals PQ. When Q goes way the hell down, P goes way the hell up.
I know your formula. Yep. Yep. We'll have to cover that one. Yeah, it's been a while since we covered that and the velocity piece, so we're due. All right, challenge taken. But I think when I show you this graph, I agree totally with what you just said, that there's a supply side shock here. I think also there is a demand side to this too, meaning that there was a lot of money put in pockets that expanded the money, and the Fed did not restrict that. They also did stimulus, more or less. They were supporting that. And then once inflation kicked in, they went the other direction, which I think they did the right thing. I'm a pretty big supporter of kind of how the Fed handled this. They waited as long as they could to allow employment to recover before they went with austerity to try to, get the inflation under control. And they did. I think they did thing. But you'll see that Milton Friedman was at least right for part of this curve, that the money supply went way, way higher than the output, and we had inflation. I think to your point, if they had anticipated or understood there was a supply shock underway, they might have done monetary austerity earlier because they didn't need, the demand wasn't going anywhere productive. They should have told people, keep your money in your pocket.
I think there's a credible argument that they were late. Even if, and I agree with the statement that inflation was transitory, there were things they could have done to make it less of a problem.
Agree. Agree.
So I'm curious. The biggest thing that happened during COVID was it wasn't the Fed dumping money into the environment, it was the Treasury.
Well, directed by Congress.
Right.
Congress is the one who passed the CARES Act and other things.
Right.
Right. But it wasn't the Fed. What is the distinction between money issued versus money issued by the Fed? And that is the expiration date. If you did not get a loan, you don't have to pay it back. That money is free money. So it's just going to circulate until someone grabs it and sticks it in a long-term bond versus a loan, which eventually you're going to have to pay back. And to me, that's the most obvious indicator of what was so different about COVID versus some of our other earlier events.
Yeah. And the economists keep fighting about to what extent was this supply side versus demand side. And, the Paul Krugman and I'm going to forget his name now, but there's another economist that at the Roosevelt Institute that he follows, Mike Konzel. Is that how it's pronounced? Konczal. But the two of them are big on the supply argument, that this inflation was about supply and not demand. I put that chart I've been talking about in the chat so you guys can see it if you're interested, but it shows the money supply, GDP, and then the inflation rate from the pandemic till now. And you'll see that curve down in the money supply where it's actually lower than it was, over the past year, which again is not usual, not typical.
I
There's
find it
another
fascinating. There's
difference
an
about
argument.
Sorry, we had two people talking. Go ahead. Mark?
I am shocking. There's an argument. We literally told people to stay home. A good chunk of the service economy vanished.
Right. But there is another difference that occurs to me. I'm not quite sure what to make of it. But when the Treasury issues money, they choose to borrow it. So they have a cost of capital. And when the Fed issues money, they just make an entry in the books and they have zero cost of capital.
The Treasury does not borrow money to spend it.
You're using very loaded words there, and you need to stop using those words.
Again, before the Fed existed, did our federal government spend money?
Sure.
How? They invented it.
That's, I still have a disconnect there. I like the idea, but I still have a disconnect.
I mean, seniorage is
No,
great.
it's wild, but it's accounting.
The federal government makes money by printing money. The difference between the value of paper and $100 bill is significant.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but
Except
didn't the
99%
Treasury
of that money is
demand?
an accounting entry.
How did the public get the Treasury notes from the government? They had to do something in exchange so they could get them to pay their taxes, right?
Well, that's actually the point, is you
Yeah.
can't pay taxes with dollar bills until someone gives you the dollar bills, period. I mean, that's it.
So the value was not, I think how to say this properly. The value was not there until the Treasury convinced the public that they needed to have those dollar bills in order to pay their taxes. It wasn't valuable just because they printed it. Forgive me for
Effectively correct
Yeah, that's right.
until the government says, yes, you need to pay us taxes and we will take these pieces of paper for taxes, or we will take this tally stick for taxes.
right.
Yes, that's what will happen.
And if you don't, we have a nice little place you can live for the next 5 years.
Or a soldier with a sword or a gun.
I mean,
Well,
if
we
you go
don't
back
do-
far enough, the banks themselves literally created the money. In the early 1800s, it wasn't the Treasury so much as chartered banks who were creating the money.
Yeah, look how successful they were.
They ran for 100 years. The
They
first
ran
major
and then they
banks
stopped,
were-
and then they ran and then they stopped, and
Oh.
then they.
Oh, yes. Yes, we have throughout history hundreds and hundreds of examples of banks running amok and destroying their own money.
Silicon
I think
Valley
China
Bank.
did it 3 times.
And isn't
Yeah.
that one of the reasons why the Constitution requires that the states only require, I forget exactly how it's phrased, as legal tender or payment or something, gold and silver coin to prevent them from becoming banks that would have debased their paper money supply?
Our Constitution?
Yeah, there's a clause in our Constitution basically getting into the banking business directly like that.
Yes, there is.
That's not what I read. I read it completely and very explicitly authorizes Congress's ability to create coinage.
Not Congress, but the states, the governments of the states.
Again,
Doesn't like North Dakota have a
every
public bank?
privately chartered bank, chartered by the Fed or our federal government, creates dollars. Well, actually, creates money denominated in dollars. That's what I keep learning. There's actually American dollar denominated currency called the euro dollar. Does it have any relationship to the Fed? Not really. It was really funny during the last 2008 financial crisis. Our Fed bailed out that system. Anyone here have a money market account? That was money
Yeah.
created out of whole cloth until the money market system blew up and then got regulated and stuck under the Fed.
So here's what I was thinking about, Christine. No state shall coin money, emit bills of credit, or make anything but gold or silver coin legal a tender in payment of debts. Article
It's in the Constitution.
1,
Okay.
Section 10, Clause 1, if I'm reading this right.
You're welcome.
All right.
I'm presuming it could be incorrect, but my understanding is that somewhere I read that the reason that they put that in there was to prevent the states from doing what some of the banks historically had done when they made their own currencies. Eventually, they got greedy and said, well, I need to make a little bit more. And then at some point, they were worthless.
Yeah. Throughout history, that's always occurred. What was really fascinating is the Virginia colony actually had a paper money supply that did not inflate to destruction. My understanding, it was quite the curiosity in Europe that they managed to pull it off.
What did they do, if I may ask, that was special?
They taxed it and burned it.
Oh, okay.
When they issued the money to buy goods and services for the Virginia colony, they very explicitly set up taxes to happen over a period of time that roughly equaled the amount of money that they spent. So they spent it, they taxed back, and they literally burned it.
Okay. That would be not surprising.
Yeah, it's called inflation. If you don't put more money in the environment, then can be safely used for exchanging of goods and services, there's no reason for inflation. Now, it's important to balance that, right? So as your economy grows, you do need more money in circulation. Otherwise, you have deflation.
Well, it's a discussion for another time, but as somebody who's very close to retirement and looking at trying to live on a fixed income and savings, I'm not sure exactly why it would be so bad if the $100 bill that I had under my mattress today, and by the way, I don't really put it under my mattress, if it was worth enough to buy $110 worth of stuff in a couple of years. I mean, that sounds like a good
You
deal.
really, really, really do not want deflation. It screws anybody who has to work for a living. I mean, maybe as a pensioner you want deflation, but it screws anybody who has to work for a living.
It screws anyone with debt.
With
So if
what?
you have a house and you borrowed money for it, and if the dollar's worth more tomorrow than it is today, then you are literally losing money on that house.
Inflation helps a debtor. So deflation hurts a debtor.
Yes. And notice that every piece of paper from the Fed says note. That is a debt. What is taxes? A debt to society. What forces the money to flow? It's a debt to something. It's actually hilarious. Okay, if you want some more recent history, Australia actually ran a surplus long enough that they almost killed their financial sector because banks run on debt.
I did read an article this morning that China continues to have a major deflation problem. So when I read it, I actually thought, oh, that's probably good. But now that I'm hearing you guys, I'm thinking that's probably not good.
It's horrific. Oh my God. Again, if deflation is occurring, you are far better off holding the money. if you are holding the money, it's not circulating. If the money is not circulating, then no, someone else is not being paid. If they're not being paid, then they're not buying something. And that spiral goes down fast and has killed kingdoms.
So, David and Karl, do you expect now that the argument about having a recession is going away? Will the GOP swing? We know they're swinging even harder towards the border, but are they going to swing now towards the overall U.S. debt? Is that going to be their focus?
I'm going to say no. They always bring it up, but it's something that people don't really care about. Like it's more of people like to complain about it, but it never really seems to reach the top of the concern list. I don't think that if they do it, I think they're wasting their time. I think it's very easy to counter. I mean, they make up stuff like Bill. They'll make up a lie and then we try to deflect it. But a high debt level, the debt to GDP is not going up anymore. It's been coming. I'm certain states it's going to go up more. It's been coming down under Biden from the peak under Trump, so he's got a good record there. As long as the economy is growing quickly, that debt to GDP ratio has been stable or falling. But as you know, the CBO is expecting that number to start climbing again as the country ages. So I just don't think, I used to be a pretty serious deficit hawk, just so you know, as a full confession. Going back to 2008, going before the Great Recession, I was all about raise taxes, cut spending, a real deficit hawk, not the fake GOP, complaining about the debt. But I wanted taxes raised and spending cut. I took debt as a serious threat. We had generals telling us that it's the biggest threat the U.S. is facing, which Paul Krugman put him in his place. He's like, you just stick to your knitting, buddy. But I do not fear the debt anymore, I have to say. And the easiest way I can say it is, you mentioned it earlier, or Mark did. We've got a net worth as a country that is far higher than the debt. The top 10% have $100 trillion of that. The top 10% have $100 trillion. If you tax them 2% of that wealth, the deficit goes away, at least for a while. So in the scale of things, it isn't that big a problem to solve. Even if you choose not to, if you left it alone, it's not a big deal. If you choose to solve it, it's not that hard. It's difficult politically, but technically it's not a hard problem to solve. You can get the deficit under control pretty fast with a wealth tax or a much steeper income tax on rich people. So it's not a they'll try it, but I don't think it's going to have traction. I really think this election is going to be immigration against women's rights, immigration versus abortion. Are enough women going to come out to help Trump lose, or are they not? They're going to stay home and immigration prevails. You never think, by the way, immigration is going to prevail, right? Because you think saner people will figure it out with the better angels. But look at what happened with Brexit. They knew it was going to be an economic disaster. Now, a lot of people were lied to, but there was enough information out there for people that wanted to spend 5 minutes on Google to find that it was going to be an economic disaster for the UK, and it's been really bad for them. And doesn't sound though like they're really serious about reversing it. They're doing their thing to keep immigrants out, and that seems to make them happy. So I'm curious to see what happens with that. I'm more curious about how the immigration narrative goes in the next few months.
Just appreciate you retire all the T-bills, the financial system collapses worldwide.
It matters who holds the debt as well. I mean, one of the reasons why Japan has had the national trajectory that they have is because so much of their debt is held domestically. And the fact that 70% of US debt is held by citizens also matters.
You're saying that's a positive thing.
Yes, it's a stabilizer.
You think
Cool.
of the government debt as this horrible thing, some people do, but it's the other side of it is it's an asset. People are holding bonds, it's an asset. And so, how bad is it? The government has the debt, citizens have the assets. what's the problem, you know?
It leads to a fairly simple question. If you eliminated the national debt tomorrow and you forced all of that money into private debt, who is taking on those private loans? I mean,
You know what's even better? How do they get the money to retire that private debt?
They'd have to get a subsidy.
Taxes, taxes,
What?
taxes, taxes.
Again, who, I mean, I know for the average human being, it's all one big pool. Okay. But can't anyone see the death spiral if you had to borrow money from a private institution to pay your public taxes? How is that sustainable?
Probably not.
Yeah,
was a
it's
question
mathematically
about-
not possible.
There was a question about crude oil. I just looked it up. It peaked at about 80 a few weeks ago, and now it's down to 76 today. And that's off of Yahoo Finance. I paid about 30 cents more today for gas than I did, I think, three weeks ago at the same station at Costco. So it was 305. And on the other hand, I passed a station in my neighborhood on the way up there, and it's only a 2-mile drive, at 349. So, and they had customers. So I don't quite understand that trade-off people are making. But you'd have to be desperate to pay that 41 cents difference between Costco and Shell. That pays your Costco fee pretty quick.
I'm looking at a chart of of gas prices as a percent of crude oil prices for the West Texas Intermediate. And so the gas to oil. So if it's low, I guess that would be good for consumers, right? The gas price is low relative to the oil price. That's good. Am I thinking that right? Not backwards? You want
Are
that
you
ratio
saying
to be low if you're a consumer?
Yeah, and that means that there's lower margin on gasoline.
So the gas, okay, so the gas price relative to I'll put the Fred chart in there. It's low right now, relatively speaking. It's come down from a peak in when was that? June was actually much higher. It's been trending down since June. That ratio. So if I think the comment is our gas prices out of whack with oil, I would say in our favor right now. And I'll put the chart out there so you can look at what I did.
Yeah, I think on the other hand, ExxonMobil just announced that their profits for the year last year were something like 13 billion. That was their net, and that's nice if you have some stock.
They pay a good dividend.
Yes, they do.
And it's, the oil, and for what it's worth, and I hate to say this as an investor, but in the last few years, the interest rates were driving not only the results for stocks, but also for bonds. And so you were getting hit sort of from both directions because rising interest rates, asset prices move in the opposite direction. Because gas prices were jumping, the energy stocks actually did very well and paid their high dividend yields throughout that period. So having an energy stocks, at least the big oil stocks, was sort of a hedge for the bad things that were happening to the rest of your portfolio if you own those things during this piece. Now you don't want to, you can look at them like a vice stock, like a cigarette stock if you want, considering what they're doing to the environment. But they are as from just a pure capitalist investor standpoint, they were a very good holding to have in the last few years.
Correct. And if you're holding index funds, you do own some of them, unless you own ESG funds, which is probably why they haven't done all that. Those ESG funds haven't done all that well because so much of that market cap based profit was tied up in energy stocks. So
Kerry put a comment out there about the gas prices are a really good pro-Trump issue, meaning the fact that gas prices were so low and now they're higher, and that the Republicans are, they get a lot of mileage out of that. That's a very important measure to them. Like those measures that I've shared with you, the way that gets covered is it's part of the real wages computation. It's part of inflation. But a lot of media coverage has been just about the cost side, the cost of gas, the cost of eggs or food. They don't communicate in terms of real wages are up. They communicate in terms of costs, your expenses are up. And part of that is the messaging. You have to, are you going to tackle that head on? I think Biden's approach has been more of the, we're working to get the costs down. He's saying, I hear you, and we're trying to get that fixed, which is not really under his control. But he's at least sympathizing. My view would have been to go the other direction, which is you're richer than you've ever been. Stop your complaining. But that's why I'm not a politician.
Yeah, I don't think that's great marketing.
We need to remember that for both parties, the wealthy are among some very big donors. And if you're a senator, a House member, or anybody else looking to get elected, having some big donors is very nice, and you're probably not going to piss them off, which is one of the reasons I think some things never, ever get fixed in spite of all the talking.
Yeah, and it's much worse now under Citizens United. So,
as a note, Karl Faulstich just texted me. He said he got kicked off of his computer, so he was wishing you all a very good night.
All right, well,
yeah,
I'm going to back out too. This has been good tonight. Thank you, guys.
Sure.
Yep. I tell you, there's not that much to talk about when things are going well.
Is there another pizza event coming up? My favorite subject.
Not to March. We had our big holiday party this last Sunday night, NWSOFA. So we moved the next pizza party to March, and I think it's going to be March when Karl gets back. Either that or Mark Lundholm is going to hold one as part of his Inflation Reduction Act, Powering Progress. So that is very cool.
That meeting is going to be going to be at the Palatine Library. So I don't know if we want to go somewhere afterward, but Rita's already booked the Palatine Library for the March event, and there's a guy going to talk about the IRA funding. So it should be really good.
It's going to be hybrid, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
They have the facility to actually do that pretty well.
Yep.
Yeah.
As long as Christine helps.
If we're largely over, I have a short talk to practice and a little four-legged reptile who thinks that it's time for us to play with him.
Oh, no.
So,
Good night.
All right. Enjoy,
Hey, David.
take care
All right.
and blessings to all of you,
David.
and stay healthy and all of that.
All right.
Hey, David,
Yes, I'm here.
I need a meeting sign off for my video.
All right. Well, thank you. This concludes our monthly presentation of the Northwest Suburbs Organizing for Action Economics Group. Thank you for attending.
Thank you for everything.